Thanks for joining us for CBN News Today. I'm Ephraim Graham.
And I'm Charlene Aaron. Lawmakers in Washington are weighing in on the Ebola crisis. Members of the House heard testimony Wednesday about the government's response to the deadly disease. That is, there are growing calls for travel restrictions and more action from the government. With Americans on high alert after a second nurse contracted Ebola in the U.S., lawmakers are demanding answers from the nation's top health officials. Thursday, CDC Director Tom Frieden faced tough questions from members of Congress about the CDC's ability to contain an Ebola outbreak.
Dr. Frieden, a second nurse affected with Ebola took a flight to Cleveland after she registered a fever. We have reports that says she contacted the CDC and was told she could fly. Did she in fact call the CDC and ask for guidance on boarding a commercial flight, as far as you know?
My understanding is that she did contact CDC, and we discussed with her report of symptoms as well as other evaluation.
People's lives are at stake, and the response so far has been unacceptable.
The issue of travel bans also dominated the hearing. Some lawmakers pressed officials on why travel restrictions are not in place for passengers coming from Ebola-affected countries in West Africa, especially since nearly 30 African countries have imposed travel bans. President Obama says he might appoint an Ebola czar to coordinate the fight against the virus in the U.S., but he remains opposed to a ban on travel from West Africa.
The problem is that in all the discussions I've had thus far with experts in the field, is that a travel ban is less effective than the measures that we are currently instituting.
Meanwhile, the first U.S. healthcare worker diagnosed with Ebola is talking and sitting up in her hospital bed. In this video, Nina Pham wipes away tears before being transferred to a special isolation unit at a Maryland facility.
Come to Maryland, everybody.
Party Maryland.
The second nurse, Amber Vinson, is being treated at Atlanta's Emory University. The investigation continues as to how the two nurses contracted the virus. And despite assurances from the White House and the CDC, Americans are still concerned that the government isn't on top of the Ebola situation. Meanwhile, one of the nurses who treated the first Dallas Ebola patient is now quarantined on a cruise ship. The nurse handled a lab specimen from James Duncan, the Liberian man who died from Ebola last week. After that, she took a Caribbean cruise. Now, the nurse is self-quarantined on that ship, even though she's not showing any symptoms of Ebola. U.S. officials are trying to bring her and her husband home early.
Pastors in Houston are fighting back against an attempt by the mayor to silence them from the pulpit. Some have been told to provide the government with their sermons. Now they're getting a little help from one of the top conservative voices in the country. CBN's David Brody reports now from Houston, Texas.
The Lone Star State slogan, "Don't mess with Texas," could now be expanded to "Don't mess with Texas pastors."
So Senator Cruz, please come share with us about this.
Thursday in Houston, Senator Ted Cruz came to his home church to give city officials a lesson on religious liberty.
The city of Houston has no power, no legal authority to silence the church.
The controversy began over a city ordinance that not only bans discrimination against LGBT people, it also allows them to choose which bathroom they want to use. That's when pastors here said, enough.
There's no such thing as anti-gay in the course of this and all, but we are for God's standard of morality.
Citizens signed petitions to overturn the ordinance and gathered enough to force a vote, but the Houston City Council declared the signatures invalid. The Christian advocates behind the petition sued. In an attempt to fight back, the city demanded to see sermons, texts, emails, or any correspondence whatsoever from pastors against the ordinance. That would have included any preaching about homosexuality or gender identity. Pastors said, no way. In an exclusive interview with CBN News, Cruz says he hopes Christians take notice of what's happening here.
Is this a situation where a sleeping giant has awoke? What is your sense here?
You know, I think it may well be, and I certainly hope that it is. I never imagined we would see this kind of hostility to faith here in Houston.
Neither can Pastor Khan, who came to America from Vietnam to get away from persecution. Now his name is on the government hit list.
This is what's going on, that they censor all the sermon
pastors have to submit our worship service program, and they have to approve it before we can conduct our service. That's why I run away from Vietnam.
While Senator Cruz and the pastors came to the church with their take, city officials have a much different take. They are trying to downplay the fact that this is an attack on religious liberty.
Houston's gay mayor is pushing the LGBT ordinance. She says her pastoral critics don't understand the concept of unconditional love, and she's downplaying the controversy too.
People are rightly concerned if a government entity tries to in any way inhibit religious speech. That is not the intent.
The city now says it will narrow the subpoenas and not require all the information it originally wanted. Pastors here aren't buying it.
The mayor and the city attorney, they did this. This is not an accident. This is not some pro bono attorney who did it and they didn't know. This was their plan all along. They just thought no one would stand up and say anything.
And they were wrong. Cruz says pastors must lead the way or the future may look even worse.
And so the specter of government trying to determine if what pastors preach from the pulpit meets with the policy views or political correctness of the governing authorities, that prospect is real and it's happening now.
In Houston, though, pastors are ready for the fight, whatever the cost. David Brody, CBN News, in Houston, Texas.
A North Carolina magistrate has resigned rather than perform same-sex marriages. He said carrying out gay marriages would violate his religious beliefs and would, quote, desecrate a holy institution established by God himself. As CBN News reported Thursday, a magistrate in another county also refused to conduct gay marriages. Then a judge ordered all North Carolina magistrates to resign or face being removed from office if they choose not to marry homosexuals.
Hurricane Gonzalo is still on track to hit Bermuda this evening. The Category 4 hurricane is expected to bring damaging winds and a life-threatening storm surge to the island. Though the eye will pass about 30 miles away, that still counts as a direct hit. People living on the island are bracing themselves. Scientists at the U.S. National Hurricane Center in Miami say the hurricane has top sustained winds of 130 miles an hour.
New signs that a peace deal may be in the works to end the fighting in Ukraine. Russian leader Vladimir Putin and Ukrainian President Petro Poroshenko have been meeting at a summit of European and Asian leaders in Italy. Putin is seeking to ease Western sanctions against his country after the Russian military incursion into Ukraine. European leaders are also backing Ukraine. German Chancellor Angela Merkel told Putin Russia must fully respect last month's ceasefire. And British Prime Minister David Cameron said Russia needs to get its troops and heavy weapons out of Ukraine. Both sides still disagree on the details of a peace deal.
ISIS fighters are infiltrating more towns and cities in Iraq and Syria. This week, the Islamic State terrorist group even came close to taking over the Baghdad airport. They were repelled by U.S. Apache helicopters. CBN News contributor Chuck Holton is reporting from Baghdad, and he says ISIS is relying on the media to help them strike fear.
The streets are quiet in Baghdad, and here it's nothing like a city under siege. In this area, I hear very little concern from the people I talk to about ISIS and the threats from the north. Here's why. ISIS is a Sunni organization, and really the only places that they've taken over so far are Sunni areas. Baghdad is a bastion of the Shia population, and so is almost everything to the south. The people here say ISIS will never take over Baghdad because they can't take over the Shia areas, and Iran, being a Shia country, wouldn't allow it. But here's the deal. ISIS doesn't necessarily have to take Baghdad to accomplish their goal. If they can give the appearance of threatening Baghdad, it sets the media in the West hyperventilating about it, and ISIS makes a major public relations coup. They realize that publicity is power, and that's exactly what the U.S. media is giving them. In Iraq, I'm Chuck Holton for CBN News.
A Pakistani court is upholding the death sentence for Asiya Bibi, the Christian woman accused of blaspheming the Prophet Muhammad. Bibi, a 50-year-old mother of 5, was sentenced in 2010 Although the appeals court rejected Bibi's appeal this week, her lawyers vowed to take it to Pakistan's Supreme Court. Bibi's case drew global attention in 2011 when 2 politicians were killed for supporting her. Over the years, various international human rights organizations have called for her release. On Thursday, Amnesty International said Bibi's sentence is a grave injustice.
An intergalactic event that takes place once in about 1 million years is happening Sunday. A comet the size of a small mountain will pass extremely close to Mars. The comet is called Siding Spring and is traveling at a speed of 126,000 miles an hour. People living in the southern hemisphere will likely be able to see the event with a pair of binoculars. 5 NASA robotic explorers are gathering data on the comet and are hoping to get pictures of the gigantic ice ball.
Coming up, did budget cuts keep the government from developing an Ebola vaccine? Or was it wasteful spending on bizarre research? You be the judge when we come back.
With Ebola fears mounting across the U.S., many are blaming the Centers for Disease Control for failing to do enough to protect Americans. Some liberals are blaming Republicans for the CDC's problems. For example, Barbara Streisand says the government can't prevent Ebola because of the GOP's budget cuts.
But it turns out the CDC and the National Institutes of Health both have plenty of money. The problem is they've wasted billions of dollars on outrageous projects. Recently, CBN's Mark Martin spoke with Dan Gaynor, Vice President of Business and Culture at the Media Research Center, about these government programs and their misplaced priorities.
Is the trouble at the CDC the fault of Republicans? I mean, my understanding is the CDC and NIH already have massive budgets, don't they?
Well, of course they do. And to say that the GOP cut their funding is absurd. And that's actually from the Washington Post. Their fact checker called it exactly that. If you go back to look at the big funding, they got a huge increase when George Bush was president. From 2000 to 2004, the infectious disease areas went from $1.8 billion to $4.5 billion. That's more than a 100% increase. It's just outlandish to claim this, but it's not too surprising. The left tends to make literally everything a political issue.
Your Media Research Center has published 15 ways the NIH and CDC wasted taxpayer money. Tell us about the top most wasteful project, Dan.
Well, this is when they spent $15 billion on basically marketing and promoting issues. This is all PR feel-good stuff. This is the kind of thing that ordinary companies, when times get tough, they cut in budgets. Nevertheless, the left is going out there complaining about, the GOP's they're the ones who cut the CDC. The CDC and actually both the CDC and NIH have been fraught with disease problems. They can't even handle their own pathogens correctly, and yet everybody wants to blame GOP.
Well, there are a number of bizarre studies involving everything from drunk monkeys to overweight lesbians. Tell us about some of these.
Well, actually, my favorite is rabbit massage. That one got $386,000. The 4-year push to analyze why overweight lesbians get drunk. The look at analyzing drunken monkeys. The push by both the CDC and the NIH into pursuing aggressively ways to control guns. The CDC and NIH have lost their way, and they've become, just the pot at the end of the rainbow for researchers who can't find other ways to fund their high-end lifestyle.
Has the CDC, Dan, really made it a priority to work on a vaccine for Ebola?
Not enough of one. I mean, this is something they've been working on for 13 years. This is clearly not a number one priority for them because they haven't had success. Now, their scientific success is never guaranteed, but if it was really a focus, all these other things would have been set aside. They would have set aside the marketing and the monkeys and decided to pursue actual science. Instead, they're spending money on propaganda and trying to control how we live, not what is a real danger to us.
All right, Dan Gaynor of the Media Research Center. Thanks for being with us, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, meet the Christian who's leading pro-democracy protests in Hong Kong. Our exclusive interview with Joshua Wong.
Police in Hong Kong cleared out a protest site in an early morning raid today. They tore down tents, canopies, and barricades that have blocked the streets for more than 2 weeks. Larger demonstration areas are still intact.
Police are getting more aggressive with the pro-democracy protesters, but Hong Kong's leader now says he is willing to meet with them. CBN Asia correspondent Lucille Toulousan recently sat down with one of the protest leaders, an amazing young man who's only 18 years old and a Christian.
It was in 2012 when Joshua Wong first became a household name. At 15, he founded a student movement that overturned a pro-communist school curriculum in Hong Kong. He is now in his first year of college, taking up politics and public administration. His passionate speeches have energized Hong Kong crowds at pro-democracy rallies. CBN News caught up with him during one of his idle moments for a rare exclusive interview.
Joshua, what triggered you to do what you are doing now, fighting for democracy?
I think the reason for me to involve in the movement and even organize the civil disobedience is just because I believe that students can choose and decide the future of Hong Kong.
The last time students stood up to the Chinese government in Beijing, many were killed at Tiananmen Square. That was in June 1989. And 25 years later.
Aren't you afraid for your life?
I think under the independence of law and the freedom of press, it's still safe for me to involve in the movement. Unlike in mainland China, someone may be kept on the jail for 10 or 20 years.
We asked Wong if he had any political ambitions.
Not really. I don't have really special idea on it. I just hope to achieve the goal of fighting for the true universal suffrage in Hong Kong.
How do you want all of this to end?
Whether we can stop the movement just depends on the attitude and the response of the government official.
You're a Christian, and what do you think is God's purpose for you?
Different people, they may have different talents on the spiritual aspect. Someone may be preach the gospel, sing inspiration. I think some of the Christians should change the mindset of the general public on Christian, rather than just keep to serve inside of the church. Christians should serve and to show the spirit of the Christian outside of the church.
Just moments before our interview, we found Wong eating cake, celebrating his 18th birthday with friends.
What is your birthday wish?
Finish this movement and give more time for me to meet my parents. My parents support me and they will give me enough of space to choose what I want to do.
Leading students in a pro-democracy movement is tiring and time-consuming. Wong's praying it will end soon so he can get back to a more normal life.
I just hope after this movement I can put more time on my study and the university. I would just hope to get more time to have a rest or sleep. More time with my parents. Yeah, and my girlfriend.
But for now, this young Hong Kong Christian knows he has a call on his life, leading his generation in peaceful protests and forward to a more prosperous future.
I believe that during the whole of the movement, God will keep to walk with me.
Lucille Toulousan, CBN News, Hong Kong.
What an absolutely amazing young man, and he does have a girlfriend too.
Yeah, happy birthday.
Yes.
I don't think that'll be the last time we hear from him.
No, he's got a bright future.
Normal life not possible for you, young man. We'll be right back. Well, the weekend is here, and you may be looking for a little family-friendly entertainment. Here with our regular movie review is Bob Waliszewski from Plugged In Online. That's the entertainment review department on Focus on the Family. Bob, first, let's take a look at the new romance film from Nicholas Sparks. It's called The Best of Me. Does this have a good date night potential for couples?
Ephraim, I so want to say yes. I always want to say yes. But essentially, it's a pair of teen lovers, Amanda and Dawson, who get reconnected 21 years later. But by then, she's married and a mom. And the film is hoping that we'll root for the two to get back together, and they do. They become lovers once again. Never mind that she's got a wedding ring on. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of Best of Me. Add to that a bunch of language problems, and we gave this one a mere 2 out of 5 for family friendliness.
Ouch. Well, there is a new animated fantasy film, The Book of Life. It almost sounds like a biblical title. What do you think?
It's a theologically messy title. I gave it a 3 out of 5. It has the potential for those families who absolutely want to teach their kids some media discernment. If they talk through some of the issues of this film, it might be a film worth going to see. Essentially, we're introduced to 2 deities who make a wager concerning a girl as to which of 2 suitors she's going to finally choose. We're told in this film that if people on Earth will remember humans that have died, they'll exist. But if people on Earth forget them, they just dry up and blow away. Theologically, it is a mess. A 3 out of 5 is not a thumbs up. It's not a thumbs down. It just says, check out more information. Some families are going to say, not for me. And some families are going to go, yeah, I think I'd like to use this as a launching pad for another theological discussion.
Approach with caution. Real quickly, we didn't get to talk to you about Left Behind. How's the movie doing?
You know, it's made about $10 million. I understand they have $15 million into it, which the rule of thumb is you need to double that to break even, so you need to make 30. But they're on their way. The film is based on the first 25 pages of Tim LaHaye, Jerry Jenkins' book. The first film, which is already 14 years old, the Kirk Cameron version, by the way, dealt with a lot of that first book, as much as they could squeeze in. Personally, I kind of still like the first one better even than the newest Nicolas Cage version.
All right then, Bob. Thanks a lot.
You bet.
Well, that's going to do it for now on CBN News Today. You can find more of our exclusive coverage of the issues you care most about at cbnnews.com.
We want to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can do it on Facebook or at CBN News on Twitter. Hope you'll join us again right here next time. Have a fabulous Friday, everybody.